Okay, we're live.
So we'll begin calling to order this meeting on February 2nd of the Rollingwood Utility Commission. We'll start with a roll call, and I'll just read off the names that I can see. So Clark Wilson.
Here.
Chris Meekin.
Here.
Phil Dixon.
Present.
Sam, I see you're there. I'm not sure we have your sound yet. And then I don't know if Ronald said he was attending, but I don't know if Ron's signed in.
I don't see them on yet. I think we had everyone able to attend, so we'll catch them if they come in.
Perfect. So moving on to public comments. I don't know if there are any public comments that were signed up for today.
We don't have anyone signed up ahead of time. If anybody does want to, you can raise your hand in the bottom corner of your screen. I don't think we have any hands raised today.
All right, just give it just a few more seconds. Perfect. So then we will move on to the consent agenda. The first item is discussion and possible action on the minutes from the December 1st Utility Commission. Did anyone have any questions or comments regarding the minutes that were provided in the packet?
No question. Move to approve the minutes.
A motion to approve the minutes. Chris seconded, and we will say all in favor of approving the minutes.
Aye.
Aye. Perfect, motion passes. So now we're moving on to the regular agenda, and I appreciate everyone joining. I also appreciate Councilwoman Amy Patillo joining us. And, you know, I would say that in my experience now for a couple of years working on the Utility Commission, we have been in some cases reactionary, but also it's been somewhat of a top-down approach. We're addressing the issues that that the City Council has, making sure that we're addressing issues that the public brings to our attention, whether that be for water rate challenges, you know, bills, etc. But I thought after having a discussion with Amy that we would address maybe three things and try to take somewhat of a proactive approach. One, there's an item here. The first item is a discussion and possible action regarding the creation of an inventory of the city's agreements and contracts supporting the city utilities. So this would be a bit more expansive than just the water utility, but would include such things as electric, as well as the services that we receive, and we'll address those in a separate one. But things like broadband, wireless, other things that come into the city that don't necessarily fall under the purview of other commissions, but might be areas where we can help. And so the first way for us to do that is to get an inventory of what we actually have. So what agreements the city has in place and what service providers are actually actively working within the city limits. So I think part of that discussion was going to be administrative and working with Amber and Ashley and just understanding who they are generally dealing with or always dealing with, and then just having that as something that we can refer back to. So I just wanted to say that it was the first item, and I wanted to open that up to the rest of the commission to see if they had any comments, questions, or thoughts about maybe the best way to proceed with that first item.
So the starting point would be the hard work for Ashley and so on. Dig through the files. Is that basically it?
Yeah, I do think we came up with something that's actually going to give them a little bit of work to do. I understand that, but I think it'd also be a collaborative effort with someone from the commission that just keeps tabs on what they're looking through and if there's anything we can do to help. So maybe it's just a matter of someone on the commission as a point person to just work with them on this inventory list, and then let us know, you know, when we have it, when that is completed. I don't think it's anything that we're going to have to vote on as far as it getting completed, but it'd be certainly something that'd be interested to share around for us to see. And then depending on what information's in there, that may spurn some other conversations, one of which is kind of later on the agenda. But that was just our initial thoughts was, let's just get an inventory who we're all dealing with in the city, and what are the status of those agreements. I know that I had at one point been tasked at looking at the electric agreements. It's something that I had looked over. I didn't understand it very much, but this might just be somewhere that we can look at something other than simply the water and the water rates, and just expanding the kind of the purview of the commission a little bit.
So the goal is to understand the agreements that the city itself has with these utilities, and the utilities' role in the city in terms of their right-of-ways and use of the tolls and so forth. Is that what you mean?
I think that typically that would fall, folks would bring that directly to city council, but perhaps it's a place where the utility commission can provide some help. It's just understanding, again, what agreements are in place, what utilities other than water are servicing the city, and just having a central repository for where all that is. So that was just the first item. I don't really think there's any, again, vote here unless we don't specifically want to do it. Then someone can motion to not do this, certainly. But it was something that I just wanted to bring to the commission's attention.
I'd be happy to serve and help our good A friends with that if they'll have me.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate that very much. I don't even think we need a vote on that.
I think they want to vote.
Well, fortunately, we talked about this a little bit in advance. So yeah, I knew I had a little bit of support.
No, I mean having me around.
No.
I think this feeds into a little bit of the comprehensive plan and the strike force.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're starting looking at that and the wish lists and the wants down there, this could actually be used as an information booklet that people can refer to. If 5-10 years down the road there's an agreement that there's going to be a development of something somewhere, what kind of infrastructure is needed to be added on to what we've got, or points of contact. So I think it's actually very useful.
Perfect. So Chris, thank you very much for helping with that. Again, I don't think there's an urgency to this, but it's just an interesting an opportunity here to maybe just gather some information that can be, again, leveraged. And that was at that point, Phil, I wasn't even thinking about that, but just leveraged by other groups that are looking for information. It'll be great to have it. So thank you for that. Any other discussion on this before we move on?
This is separate from the cell phone service question, is that right?
This would be separate from that. That's a whole nother big project that we've come up with. So if there's no other discussion on this, we'll move on to agenda number 4, item 4. This is discussion and possible action on a project regarding the wireless broadband and cellular service in the city. This came to us as an idea through Councilwoman Patillo. And it's really, I don't think, a surprise to anyone that there are folks in the city that have trouble with both cellular service as well as perhaps with some of the broadband and other services that are provided, specifically, again, for cellular and internet connection. The city has taken a look at this before, and I think there was certainly an outcry, or there was definitely some pushback with regard to setting up cell phone towers within the city, or a giant cell phone tower near the park, etc. But maybe that was several years ago. I certainly don't know what the options are now. I know specifically for my house, when I first moved in, I called Verizon and they told me I was a low signal area, right? And that was really nothing they could do. So I know there are other folks within the city that may be challenged with cell phone service and others. So this would be just one, getting an understanding of perhaps best way to understand where we're having the problems. Where are the low spots? Is it all over the city? Is it specific areas? And are there options, more than one, to potentially address both cell phone and then the Wi-Fi broadband services that come into the city? So again, I just wanted to bring that up as something, again, that falls outside of the water utility. That might be something that we may be interested in looking into And I wanted to just get the feedback from the rest of the commission on a project of this nature.
I think it's actually important in the transition to electronic meters. All of those require cell phone service. I've got one of the test meters in my yard. It works fine, but if you have no service in some place, the meter won't work. So that has to be addressed. And also there may be some options in the distribution of the signal that can be where it could be put on people's houses, for example, instead of a giant tower, but distributed under smaller antennas that are more diverse and not visible. So those are possibilities.
And truthfully, I don't know if the objection historically was aesthetics,
I think it was aesthetics.
So there may be options that either weren't necessarily considered, or there may be options that weren't available when this was first brought up that may have, as you mentioned, a better solution. I've certainly seen towers that look like trees before, but who knows? So again, just wanted to open it up for discussion with the rest of the folks to see if there are any other thoughts on taking up a project of this nature.
Well, wouldn't we first have to identify the poor areas of both cell phone and broadband issues? That'd be kind of your first thing, is to identify the service providers and identify the dark spots.
So it kind of follows into the first agenda item, which is just understanding, right? And I think we know there's the majority of the folks that service the area from a cell standpoint, but understanding the Wi-Fi and broadband service that would be part of that inventory. And then what would be a good way of understanding maybe it comes directly from those organizations, right? Those companies know where there's service or where there isn't service. And that might be the easiest place to ask, as opposed to asking the community. But any thoughts?
Well, there's obviously with the strike force, there's there will be a questionnaire going out at some point, very imminently, an updated one, I would have thought. And if people do have issues with the cell coverage or the broadband, maybe that is an issue that's raised through that. But if we are already sending stuff out with respect to that, is there any, I'd hate to inundate the community with other things, or is there a way we can piggyback?
And this is my naive question, but I mean, if I assume we talk to a third party or provider about coming in and actually installing and telling us what the options are, can those same groups do an evaluation to us to kind of stress the importance of us doing this? That may be no cost. It seems like if they can provide us and show us where the low pockets are, give us more reason to buy their product from. I just don't know how that industry works on this front.
Chairman, I can add a little bit more information in that. I think the primary opponents of the tower from years ago, as I recall, have moved away. And at least at our house, my wife has to go out in the front yard to get cell reception, and we've had to keep a landline just so that there's a 911 number for our daughters in case that ever was the case. So I think maybe it's time to revisit either strapping something onto the emergency tower or thinking about maybe a tower.
Yeah, just in my experience so far in rolling whatever the past, I mean, some of y'all probably been here longer than me in the neighborhood, but 6-7 years, it's been that people seem to be very against, even if it's a small group, they're usually loud voices against changes to the aesthetics of the neighborhood. So I think if we went forward this and first identify where the weak spots are, but then two, have solutions that may impose less of a damage to the aesthetics of the neighborhood, I think we'd be more likely to get it passed. I feel like if we try to talk about putting a tower up again, we're going to, whether it's the people who've left or the previous opponents, there will be opponents as to putting a tower up. I'm sure there's other alternatives that we could come up with that could address the problem that maybe wouldn't be quite as intrusive.
Ideally, we'd want someone who could create a hotspot as well and then kill two birds with one stone.
Yep.
I I can give a little bit of background from the council perspective on both the tower and then other solutions. I would categorize the opposition to the tower in probably 3 buckets, and one of them would be aesthetic. One of them would be related to the location that was proposed in the park, and those who are pretty fiercely opposed to anything changing about the park, and perhaps that's included under aesthetics, but I saw a new group of people who were engaged for the first time under that heading. And then there were also people who were concerned about the environmental and safety issues that they perceived to be related to a tower. So since the tower discussion, we actually had AT&T come in and discuss putting up the 5G cells in Rollingwood. And they came a lot of months in a row. And I believe, Amber can correct me, but I believe we finally got them to agree to put one over by Trader Joe's because there was enough density there for it to be worth them to put their 5G cells over there. And then did they ever, we tried to leverage letting them put one there, with them also having to put one by City Hall, but did they ever actually put the one by City Hall?
They did. And what we learned was they had to build the infrastructure back to, I think they had a little headquarters at 360.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to go through Westlake Hills. I don't know if they've actually flipped the switch and turned it on.
I don't think they have. Yeah. So
I can find out the status of that.
Yeah. So just one thing that occurs to me, having heard the telecommunication discussion different times, is I think that the discussion about identifying where the low spots would be and where are the spots in the city where people are having the most problem getting reliable service. And then I think looking at the agreements to see what can be negotiated with those providers to potentially improve the infrastructure specifically for those areas. And like one example I would just give is that right now we have a 5-foot PUE on the back of our property, and there are currently 7 wires running on top of the ground. They haven't even been put up on the poles. They're just on top of the ground providing telephone service and broadband to my neighbors' houses. And so there's some questions in my mind about where things are running in our network and whether there are some ways that we might be able to even improve the telecommunications options in the city just by consolidating some of and improving the actual infrastructure. And if there's things in our agreements right now that we could be, as a city, helping represent our customers, like the people right now as a customer, I have very limited negotiation power. But if the city were able to come in and say collectively, we need you to provide reliable communication service to these 10 homes, then there may be more leverage to actually get improved services to our community. That's my thought. But if anybody wants to come see a bunch of wires running through my yard, you're welcome to come.
Yeah, and Amy, we had a wire go down in our front yard a few weeks ago, and we called AT&T, and they came out, and there was about 10 wires running from the pole to our house really low. And the guy was like, none of these are even good wires anymore. These are from like 20 years ago and past services. These wires don't even exist anymore. And they just like cut down like 8 of them and rehung the one they had in just an afternoon. And he's like, man, y'all's whole neighborhood really needs to get these looked at individual basis, because this is pretty ridiculous. So I think what you're saying is right. And I think they all have incentive to come try to do that. 1, make the service better, but 2, clean up what is here to make sure their infrastructure is good and reliable and safe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a base level thing. And then potentially looking at ways I've wondered about, and these are things that are ideas in my head, y'all, this is for y'all to discuss, but they're just things that I've noticed. I've wondered if, because we have such low density, that seems to be a reason that AT&T and other cell phone providers don't want to necessarily invest in the area. But I've wondered if there might be grants or if there might be other ways for us to tap into state resources to make sure that we have effective communications, because our police department is also impacted by that. Our on-duty officer, they're getting calls on a cell phone that only works in certain parts of the city. And so I think that there's an issue, a safety issue angle potentially with that, where we might be able to, like I said, right now, I have no idea what, I think that the inventory would help. And then it would help our residents to also look at what's the agreement, and then potentially figure out how do we advocate for better service to our residents collectively, because I think there's probably more power collectively than me calling AT&T 20 times trying to get them to improve service, because that didn't work.
I was just about to turn my camera around. I'm on my back deck and show you there's 7 wires on the right of way between myself and my back neighbors, and 5 drops to my house. And I can't imagine why there's 5 drops to my house.
Hey, on another point, I mean, I know we're our own neighborhood, but I mean, Westlake is there, Austin's there. I assume there's the other properties adjacent to Rolling Wood experience similar connection issues. I mean, is there a way to kind of, I know we don't have huge density, but if we can also loop in the people on Stratford, the people in Las Lomas, and some of those areas, we may build up more force if we had Westlake and Austin also kind of pushing for it.
That's a great point. I know that 2 of the lines that they recently ran through RPUE are actually supplying telephone service to 2 properties in the city of Austin.
So anything we can do to kind of build up that leverage may make sense for us to kind of strategize around.
So it sounds like this, the first order of business for this is to understand what contracts or what agreements we have now in place with what service providers. And then, certainly we can give them a chance, but it doesn't mean that someone else who doesn't have the business wouldn't want to take the opportunity to win the business. So understanding what our current provider can do or is willing to do, and then searching for others for alternatives. So that seems to be steps 1 and 2.
What carriers are we concerned about?
Well, I think this is specifically so think of communication. So I would say AT&T, Verizon, and now Sprint and T-Mobile. But those are your cellular providers among Spectrum.
I've had T-Mobile for about 10 years, and I've never had problems in Rolling Wood with reception. Of course, I'm right there on Rolling Wood Drive. Maybe that makes a difference. But
so again, when I called Verizon, not a small provider, the day I moved in my house, they said specifically, they looked up and said, you're in a low service area. And so it's pretty well known that there are spots around town, certainly. Part of it has to do, I think, with geography or topography, potentially, right? But other spots just don't have strong service. The dead zone by City Hall is notorious. If you're on the phone and you're driving down, you're going to lose that call, or very closely to losing that call anywhere as you're driving down Nixon. And as Chris mentioned, spotty service in the house, walking around staring at bars while you're talking on the phone, trying to catch the spot in the house. Usually it's the corner in my kitchen is a good spot from time to time. So I think I don't think we're looking at a major project. It's just understanding if there's a way to improve overall coverage, and even as Amy mentioned, for safety purposes, just to make sure that there's strong coverage everywhere, because I think there's a lot of folks that just don't have strong service, both cellular and then even on wired delivery, which is, we think there's a bottleneck likely somewhere that is impacting broadband to some folks. I don't think we all need fiber or 1 gigabyte service, but it'd be great to have just a strong signal that's good. I know that even my Spectrum when I switched from AT&T to Spectrum, and that's coax. That's limited in speed, and it's still limited within those limits. So sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. It'd be great to understand if there's a way to make sure that it's more consistent. And just don't know what how large of a project that is. It's just trying to scratch the surface and see what's there.
Well, you can, I'm just looking now, there are things available online that you can walk around with a device and actually map the signal strength in the streets. And I know we've got plenty of people walking the neighborhoods.
Absolutely. I've always found it amazing when anytime you move into a new house and you have the cable provider come out to just even bring in cable, they can't find a jack that works. They're testing the signal. Meanwhile, the person that lived there just before had cable from the same provider. I never quite understood how the same jack doesn't work 2 days after someone turns off their service and then the same guy comes out. So I've always found it somewhat amusing and challenging to figure out how any of that stuff works. So I thought this was, again, just another opportunity for the commission to look at something that it does have an impact on the community, certainly hopefully a positive impact if we can improve some of these services. And again, it's a little bit different than what we've normally been looking at or traditionally looking at, which is again, focus on water and drainage and the rates. So,
John, just to spitball real quick. Might there be an expert out there that has helped other communities? I mean, I can't say because this is kind of not my field, but it seems like that we're not the only ones. And that's a market opportunity and somebody might have filled it.
Yep. Well, I would say that, and I don't want to, I'm happy to keep discussion open, but I will offer to work with Amber and Ashley with regard to who the current providers are, as well as researching who might be we'll call it, it's going to be a consultant, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that has helped communities out with solving some of these issues. And it might not even be, maybe it is simple, maybe it isn't, but certainly just getting some thoughts on as to how to best proceed. So I'll happily work on that first step.
I will go online and try to figure out, is there an easy way to map with the various carriers? Because there's a lot of information available. It's just going through the data and seeing if someone out there provides it, because it must be available.
I mean, I figure when Verizon told me I was in a low service area that they were looking at, someone has the information, right? So it's either them or it's us. We have to get it ourselves to prove it to them. So I think I appreciate that as well. So again, want to happily keep this open for further discussion, but I can also close it by saying that I will work on getting some more clarity around our existing providers. Phil has offered to look into how we can map where our service troubled spots are. And then I will also look to see what other folks have potentially helped communities that are dealing with issues like this. And that seems like a good start for this project. Does anyone have anything else to add?
Thank you, John.
All right. So we will move on then to item number item number 5, which was, this was just to open it up again to any other ideas, or to say, I think that at least, maybe not on every meeting, but every other meeting, or certainly want to keep it open to the commission to come up with thoughts. If there's other projects that you think we should be addressing or looking at within the community, I want to have an opportunity within the agenda just for folks to bring those up. Certainly we won't have one every time. We may not have one for the next 6 meetings. But there might be something that has been on someone's mind for a while, and they finally think maybe utility can take a look at it. And so I just thought we would put this in the agenda to open it up for comments from the commission itself, if there were any projects or thoughts or issues that had come up over the last, since the last meeting that would want to be addressed either here or put on for a future agenda.
Well, I think we, one thing we ought to know is what our test period is for our electronic water meters and how to develop a plan to go forward after we're satisfied or not with the, I think the dozen or so meters that are in place now.
So Amber, what is the status of the test of the meters? I don't know, I wanted to say beta, but of the trial for the electronic meters, and is there a point where they're going to come back around and say, what do you want to do now that we've had these installed? I think it's only been a month or two.
Yeah, I think it's only been a month. We've had pretty good success with those meters alerting people to leaks and finding just really small water leaks. At one meter, they were able to detect a leak in the ice machine. Yeah, I don't know how y'all are. I know some of y'all have them and how you feel about them. But yeah, I think the period was supposed to be 3 months, maybe 3 to 6 months. I'd have to confirm that with the contract, but then come back around. Also, part of the deliverable was a propagation study to determine where in the community they might need boosters for those meters to be read. We don't seem to be having an issue with the 15 that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
But that is something that I reminded AWR that they had promised to us a while ago. But I think it's going well. The people who have them seem to be, engaged with them, interacting with them. Any feedback y'all have on
No, I
them
think they're
for
working
me?
perfectly for me.
Yeah, working well. That's helpful to know that we have just a few more months, and then I assume this will be back on the agenda to make a decision as to what the cost is if we want to continue using AWR. Are these the meters that we want to be using, or the platform we want to be using going forward? Perfect.
I have 2 comments just to follow up with what Amber said. I'm just remembering that a couple weeks ago, I asked her if there had been any surveying of the people who were using them, and that I had offered to also help write some survey questions, and I never followed up. So I apologize for dropping the ball on that. But it may be worth just sending out a quick email to the group to ask a few questions about how people's service has been going. So if y'all have feedback on that, it'd be great. And then the other thing I will say that I have found out, being someone who is in a low-lying cell phone, very, very erratic cell phone area, is that our water meter was off for 3 weeks, but apparently AWR doesn't have the technology on their side to have detected that it was no longer reporting. So that may be something that, in looking at whether this is the platform to continue on with, whether that's something where it's just a deficiency in what they're providing, or if it's an actual deficiency in the equipment. And then when the AWR text came out, it was 2 guys, and they were both here for about an hour to fix it and get it back online. So I kind of also am starting to have a little bit of a thought of, I wonder what happens if we put the whole community online, and then how many of those meters are going to disconnect every month, and how much we're going to start spending on having them reconnected.
I'd certainly be curious as to what was the issue with the meter. If it was a part that burned out, as an example, malfunctioned, or if it loses signal, it can't restore it, it just shuts off. So I'd be
Similar
curious.
question. We haven't, Amber, have they given us a reason of why they think it went offline?
No, but I do know, William, are you okay with me sharing this story about your meter?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so in William's case, his meter is near some landscaping, and so it was pretty shady, and so the battery was working overtime to try and catch the sun and send the signal. And so we've replaced the battery in his meter, and now he's going to try and trim back some of the bushes. But that could have been the case. I'll make a note to follow up about your meter, Amy. But that's, yeah, something that's happened.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to start tracking the costs that are associated in the types of maintenance items that we're learning about, because
And I'll also,
Hey, him.
well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's helped me identify 2 leaks I've had. One on a kind of master valve out front, and then 2, another sprinkler issue I was having. So I probably wouldn't have caught it, especially the kind of the master valve out front, which was leaking materially. Without that, it would have taken a lot longer. So it's been productive in my house so far.
Great.
Okay, well, there's a T-Mobile tower apparently off Hubbard I've just found. Hubbard and Pickwick. It looks like there's only T-Mobile near us, so apparently AT&T's rubbish, but we all knew that.
Well, maybe everyone, there's an option if everyone wants to go switch. Amber, do we want to address, after there's a few other updates on the fire hydrant? We just talked about the electronic water meters and some of the other projects. Is it worth just touching on those quickly?
Yes, I think so. The fire hydrant testing and painting project is complete. They're working on a draft of a final report. Between staff and this company that was hired, I think we've had about 10 fire hydrants that have needed to be replaced. We have done 2, but it's 10 out of 108. So that's pretty alarming. $5,000 it costs to replace a hydrant. So we're going to have, but obviously it's important. We've got to get that done. So we'll continue to work on replacement of the remaining hydrants that are not functioning. The LUE study, I was hoping to have a utility billing manager in place to start exposing them to the utility billing process and to work on this with NELISA. We are going to interview sometime next week. We didn't get many applicants, so we'll interview them, and maybe quantity is not an issue; it'll be quality. And as soon as we can bring them on, I figured this would be a good project for them to take on and get a good understanding of our system. We have had Keith Freeze, the city's engineer, work on water and wastewater models and capacity. The strike force had asked questions about, if there were development on BK Road, do the 2 systems even have the capacity to support? The water system could increase by 50%, and the wastewater, we have a couple hundred LUEs. When the system was designed, it was designed for about 1,000. From what the engineer could tell, we're using a little over 500. So we would have that many LUEs left to grow. The easement identification and location project, I think y'all kind of remember this project. The council did engage WSB Engineering. We have a kickoff project tomorrow. This first step in the process, they're going to look at all of the plats the city has on file, map them, and then we go from there to determine if there are any additional research that needs to be done in identifying those easements. Hopefully we'll have everything.
I have that on my calendar for Thursday. Is that a different
Yes,
Is it Thursday or is it tomorrow? Or is it both?
Thursday.
Okay, perfect.
Thursday. Yeah. Sorry. I said tomorrow. Finally, the water capital improvement plan. Y'all are aware, all the boil water orders that have been happening. I went back and calculated, I think over the past 36 months, there have been 31 water leaks, and a little over 20 of them have required a boil water order that affected the community in some way. So we have started looking at our what we've got, and then a prioritization of what needs to be fixed. So far, about 79% of our water line is older than 2009, and it's suspected that it's a lot older than 2009. So that's where we're at on that project.
Great. Thank you. And again, just before we adjourn, does anyone have anything else they'd like to either add or additional comments on some of the items that have been discussed this evening?
Yes, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
This is Sam. I'm very happy to be joining you folks and hope I can make some kind of a contribution. My question is, I'm told that particularly all the lines, or a lot of the lines on Timberline, and also the water lines that are in the cul-de-sacs are in really bad condition and deserve some kind of a priority. Have you all in the past talked about that? And am I just being redundant or what?
The council did talk about repairing the cul-de-sac lines. They actually procured engineering drawings of improving those lines. So that project would be ready to go if there were funding available. There wasn't enough money to get them all done.
Let me ask this a little bit differently. It seems like we've got a city that has very expensive lots in it, that has very expensive homes in it. And we're sitting here wrestling with the water system for a number of years. We had a bond issue and it wasn't enough and it didn't do the trick. We obviously don't have enough money in the city budget to take care of all the water line problems we have. Why aren't we considering or at least exploring the possibility of refinancing any bonds we have and getting additional bond money to fix this problem over a reasonable period of time?
Seems like a reasonable question. I'll answer it that way. Certainly, I will say that during my time on the commission, Sam, we have focused on looking at the water system from a budgetary standpoint, understanding, again, this has been the rate studies that we've done, which is to say, are folks paying for water that is being used? Is there enough income coming into the system simply to maintain what we have, let alone looking into the large capital improvement projects, as you mentioned, to address some of these much larger issues. And so I do think you bring to light something that we have talked about from time to time, which is the system's old and it needs some help. But what are the steps that we're going to take and in which order? It had seemed that from the last few years, we focused on simply getting the water utility back into the black where it was running in the red. It just wasn't generating enough income to simply support itself. And so we focused on that initially. It sounds like there are some projects in place to, there's at least we know the one that wasn't funded in place to look at the water issues. And I agree with both you and Amber that we've looked at, the frequency of the water boil notices has been noticeable as of late, since we had several just in the last few weeks. And so I would agree that this is something that needs to be addressed. The question is, as you mentioned, how do we pay for it? And, I'm not familiar with what financing options have been viewed in the past and what options are available to us. Certainly seems like something that will need to be addressed at some point, because we simply can't keep up with, one, the construction, and two, just the demand on the system, right? So I certainly appreciate your comments. I'm just not sure. I would say let's put that on an agenda to talk about what has been already looked at, priced out, and we don't have the funds for, and what are some options that we can have to look at potentially completing those larger projects.
No,
Okay,
I'm not trying to solve the city's problems with water all in one day or 1 month or 1 year. But it seems to me, I'm a former banker in the lending area. And it seems to me we've got an opportunity here. Rates, corporate rates, city rates, municipality rates on debt right now are as low as they're ever going to be, I know, in the rest of my lifetime, and maybe in the rest of your lifetime. They're just really, really cheap right now. And if we don't, in a reasonable period of time, take advantage of getting financing in the market to take care of these problems, this opportunity is going to slip away from us. So that's where I'm coming from.
actually, if I can step in here, the Strike Force does have a bond and subrate committee. I am part of it. Brooke Brown leads it. We have already looked at the current bonds that are under the city's jurisdiction, and within the Strike Force, we have looked at just what could be raised off kind of rough approximations of what we can get from current market rates, and what impact that could possibly be if all of that were to fall upon the tax rate for the city. So that's a one-pager that is out there on the Strike Force. It should be posted, shouldn't it, Amber? So all that information is available there to access, to look at that. As for the specific bonds that the city holds, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 2 of them cannot be refinanced due to them being within the 10-year window of them being financed. There's some laws around cities not being able to refinance them because they're callable and non-callable. Once you get past 10 years, you can refinance them. But in the short term, they can't. There's a couple, I think, there's one that's maturing in about 3 years, which will free up some cash flow. So we have looked at the possibility of refinancing and looking, and that work is available for people to look at on the Strike Force portal, I believe.
Well, I would personally be glad to look at it and see if I have any recommendations, but I don't even know who to talk to about that.
You're talking to him.
Okay.
Tom, if you go on the Strike Force website, it should be, there's a one-pager that is out there that basically highlights if you wanted to borrow, if the city wanted to borrow X amount, what potential impact would that be on the bottom line of the tax rate?
We're happy. We can send that out to everybody tomorrow morning too. Make sure it's right in your fingertips.
Yeah, thank you, Amber.
Thank you.
One comment I would make, Sam, is I think that you bring up a great point about figuring out how to prioritize some of these projects. So we do have tax notes that the city took out last summer. And because we didn't use that money to purchase the property on Vail, which is what the initial intention was, there is a process that I proposed be set up and that the council approved for deciding which projects are going to be funded using that tax note money. And there is enough money available right now to do the cul-de-sac projects. And when I proposed the process, I proposed that the project I was the most interested in is the cul-de-sac lines. I had one resident contact me and say they thought that was interesting, and no other feedback from anyone else. So I have not pursued it because the impetus on the council has seemed to be that fixing some of the drainage issues with that money is more important than water lines. But I am happy to put that item up for consideration, and if there were some community support for it. I just have been concerned about putting it up without community support, because it would take a chunk of the money that I believe there are neighbors who are anticipating that their projects, their drainage projects, will get performed with that money. And it would not, if we use it for the cul-de-sac lines, it would not be there for those drainage projects. And so I've kind of held off because I haven't had the residents of those cul-de-sacs or any other, I've had one person who thought it was interesting. I brought that up.
Well, maybe I don't misunderstand. I think a lot of those breaks have been in the cul-de-sacs, haven't they?
We're having them mapped, and I can share with everybody. It seems to be all over the community. The problem with the cul-de-sacs is that the water lines are really small. And, if we want to talk in terms of property values, it would be less desirable to buy a property on a cul-de-sac when the water line is small, possibly insufficient to provide fire protection. So that's where we're concerned. I think there have been some leaks on the cul-de-sacs, but definitely the size of the water line is a concern.
What has been our experience with the breaks? Have any of those been like contractors were digging or whatever, or what seems to be causing those?
Some were due to that, but not all. The most recent community-wide water break is concerning. I think it was a newer pipe. It appears as though it was installed improperly. Apparently what David, our public works director, was explaining to me is that when you construct a water line, usually you start at one end and go to the other. Apparently on this line, they started at both ends and then met in the middle. And the middle was like, the topography just didn't work. Yes, it was like this. And so it never had a chance. He also said the pipe wasn't properly bedded. So it was just sitting on rock. And if you've got water, even just flowing through the line, you're going to have it, shaking, and it's going to break. And so he thinks that that line will break in the future as well, because it was installed improperly and not with the proper bedding. I think we've got a good staff now to make sure we're, performing quality control of any repairs. And then, should there be any future, water line replacement projects, city staff would make sure we're on site to make sure that the lines are placed properly. But that didn't happen for that line.
I just wanted to ask Phil, if you would, outside the meeting, I don't want to take up our time in here, but if you wouldn't mind calling me at some point or another. They have my number at City Hall. I'd like to kind of get a picture of what we've looked at in financing and whether it's been desirable or undesirable.
Okay, well, just so you know, I've pulled it up now. We've been talking with the city's capital advisors, James Gilliott, US Capital Advisors, and right now it looks like there are probably 4 obligations that are out there. There is the tax notes, which Amy referred to just, and I think the principal outstanding on that's just over 2 million. We have some series bonds from 2019, 2014, and 2012. The 12s expire in 2023. The 14s expire in 2034, I believe those are the ones we have to wait until 10 years before we can get to them. So that would be 2024. And then the 2019s, I think those are the ones that the council refinanced and saved a bunch of money on a few years ago. So with respect to what current is outstanding there and obligations, there is the possibility of doing stuff, but I don't think once we looked at it and we talked with them, it was pretty marginal to do something as it stood right now. Now, I could be mistaken on that, but that was certainly the impression I had right now, that it was pretty marginal because you can't, there were some laws done in 2017 that basically prevent municipalities from taking out bonds and then refinancing ad hoc, because that's kind of not the nature of them. So yeah, I'm more than happy to go over that with you on one-on-one, but I wanted to just give that more to the broader commission.
I would appreciate it. I know it. I don't want to take up a lot of people's time here. And I think we also ought to consider looking at more than one bond house and getting their opinion. So at least we have a couple of opinions that say, yes, you should do this, or no, you shouldn't do this. But I know a lot of individuals right now who are refinancing millions and millions of dollars of indebtedness right now, because this is a rare opportunity to get some rates that they may never see again.
No, trust me, Sam, we got potentially the city has an awful lot of financial obligations in some of the stuff that is on a wish list of things that need to be addressed. And so if at some point we do need to raise funds, I absolutely agree that, you know, that's something that should be considered by the council for raising those funds, because it is at such a low rate. But again, then how does that get paid? I think without the cash flow, then you're talking about raising taxes, aren't you?
Well, I think people in the city of Austin are going to get hit a lot harder by this Capital Metro thing than we would get hit by an increase for taxes for this purpose.
Well, Chris, were you?
Yeah, do you mind if I peel off here, because the bonds and that stuff isn't anything that runs through this commission, and if there's things that run through here, great. Council member, I've heard so much more trouble about drainage than cul-de-sac pressure, so that's just a data point of one, because I've had friends whose houses flood. So I would kind of bend your ear a little bit about drainage. And, you know, we put 5 years into trying to just raise wastewater and water rates to where we weren't going to the city for funding and we were in the black, that for us to, you know, try to have a non-leaking water system would, and then have to charge our residents, they'd revolt probably.
Well, there, appreciate that and agree, right? There's lots of issues, right? And in many cases, as I mentioned early on, right, we're being tasked with what the city is seeing as an issue that falls under the jurisdiction of kind of the utility commission, and then we're tasked with a plan, coming up with a plan, and working with Amber and Ashley on who are the right people to get that information from, and then disseminating that back up to the council with a recommendation for those items that specifically fall under kind of the purview of utility. Some of those, a lot of those had to do with the wastewater rates. Today I brought in, we brought in a few more items to discuss, again, around some of the signal issues, communication issues that we're having in the city. And then certainly appreciate Sam bringing up some other, again, issues that we know of, and figuring out is there a way for utility to address those. Certainly on the financial side, if we are going to be tasked with something, you know, I hope the city lets us know, the council lets us know, and we'll put that as part of our agenda to figure out ways to help them. So appreciate all of the discussion this evening. And again, I think the idea was to say where there are some areas sometimes outside of the wastewater that we have been focused on water rates and wastewater so much over the last few years? And are there some other areas that we can focus our attention on that would be beneficial to the community? And so as other things come up, please bring them to the attention of the commission. Please bring them to my attention or to Amber and Ashley's, and we can certainly have discussion on them and determine if there's something that we should be doing as a commission or if it falls somewhere else. But I appreciate everyone's input this evening. And if there's no other comments, I would move to adjourn. And so I'll open it to see if anyone has no other comments. Otherwise, I will adjourn. And with that, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your
Thank you.
contributions this evening. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.